All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this 13th installment of the Regional Report, a GPEC Virtual Series. A great topic today. We will cover how COVID-19 has impacted our understanding of the business side of healthcare. I want to introduce myself. My name is Eric Sperling. I'm the Managing Director here at the Social Television Network. We are a local media company based here in downtown Phoenix. We have a streaming network that you can download from the App Store or Google Play. All of our shows and segments are dedicated to local leadership, community growth, and actionable solutions, hence our relationship with the Greater Phoenix Economic Council and their CEO, Chris Camacho, who we will hear from today. So very excited to partner on this virtual series with them. I do want to mention some upcoming events, some GPEC events we have. The GPEC Ambassador Program will be launching an event this Thursday on Arizona's Water Blueprint, in partnership with ASU. That will be June 18th from 10 to 11. If you're joining us for the first time, I want to mention that this will be an exclusive event for GPEC investors. So if you're not a GPEC investor but would like to learn more, please reach out to the engagement team. You can see Nicole's email there at the bottom of your screen. And again, we will announce future regional reports very soon. And you can always check out past installments. Again, this is our 13th today. A lot of episodes are available at gpec.org /blog. Okay, if again, it's your first time, we have some housekeeping to run through. Today's webinar will last for approximately 1 hour. All of the audience members will be muted and without video. The webinar is being recorded, will be shared out on the GPEC website and social media platforms. You may submit questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, but due to time constraints, we may not be able to get to all those questions. Should you experience any technical difficulties at all, we always recommend just log out and log back on. That usually fixes it. And then we invite you to share this information on social media. Please feel free to tag GPEC and use the hashtag #GreaterPHX Okay, a little different format today. Today's regional report will be structured into 2 sections. To start, we're going to hear from a couple of case examples on the business side of healthcare from some leading investment firms, and then we're going to transition into a fireside chat discussion followed by live audience Q&A. That fireside chat will be between Chris Camacho and Dr. Richard Gray, who is the CEO of Mayo Clinic here in Arizona. Also on the panel will be Patrick Holcomb, founding partner, Ironwood Venture, and David Kotter, founder and CEO of Integrity Capital. And let's start there. So David is the president and CEO of Integrity Capital, company focusing on proactive commercial mortgage services for clients throughout the U.S. And again, today's regional report, really the result of a conversation between David and his longtime friend and business colleague, Patrick Holcomb, who we mentioned over at Ironwood Venture. Patrick is a Fortune 25 executive responsible for over 2,000 associates and $450 million in profit and loss. He currently oversees strategy and operations at Ironwood Venture. Thank you both for joining us today. I know you have some slides, and we're going to turn the floor over to you guys.
Thanks, Eric, and thank you to GPEC and Mayo for the opportunities to partner on this really important topic. And so my hope is in the next few minutes just to sort of bring some tangible and tactical concepts to the conversation. And so, you know, these concepts that I'm going to discuss really come from a program called Relaunch. And essentially, this is how to manage your business through crisis and emerge with a game plan to thrive. And there's generally about 7 steps in the program, but for the sake of today's discussion, I'm really going to just focus on 2 of them. One of them is redefining your message, will be the first one I'll talk about, and then we'll transition into people. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. So really, you know, keeping your external message during normal times is generally fine, but redefining your message becomes really ever so important during the current environment. All of these messaging stems from really the prior step that we can see on the slide, which is pivoting your offering, and it's really crucial with changing markets. And when I really say redefining markets, what I mean is crafting an external message to your audience about your offer that is clear, empathetic, sensitive, and relevant to their current felt needs. And so along with being empathetic and sensitive, the words you use must maintain relevance to your adaptive offering and take a completely new approach. And so remember that customers need to understand the value that you bring more than ever and your messaging really will shape that connection that you have. Think in terms of getting back to the origins of your brand and validating those words that really still resonate today. So now I'm going to transition onto the people side of it. So really, the people are the bedrock of success in an organization, and really ever so more right now in this current environment. And so during a market shift, we have to be really swift about focusing on following areas of your people. And so to be clear, when we say people, we're talking about your current employees, partners, external industry colleagues, strategic partners, and also political affiliates as well. And so sequencing your strategic discussions are important. So consider beginning with your furthest reach and then pulling into the closest team. And so when tackling the people section, really consider some of the questions that I'll walk through, and I'll give you about 5 of them. And so number 1 is, where should I best spend my efforts during this time? Number 2 is, what practical advice would you give me that would give us the greatest outcome? The third one is, how can we best be proactive given the current environment? The fourth one is, who else do you think we should be talking to that is best suited to speak into the current situation? And finally, at what point should we be making more dramatic decisions? So my hope is that this will be of value to everybody out there. And Patrick is going to take the baton and give us a few examples of how this played out in real time. And also note that a full version of this is going to be available post the discussion as well. So Patrick?
Thanks, Dave. Hey, and also thanks again to GPEC as well as Mayo for hosting the discussion. So Ironwood, we're a full service management consulting firm bringing Fortune 100 disciplines. So think of a Deloitte or McKinsey. The difference is we focus on small business. So as a management consulting firm, we have to be out ahead of challenges and trends so that we can help our clients win. With the pandemic, it's even more crucial. So that's why I developed this launch blueprint back in late March that Dave just covered. It's not going to solve world hunger. It won't get MLB back on the field, but hopefully there's a few nuggets that you may find helpful. So I want to share just a couple of practical examples of how that blueprint framework can and should be applied for all business, whether you're big or small. So the first is abilities neurological rehabilitation, which bridges exactly what we're here to talk about today, medical and business solutions, and really hones in on number 2 and number 3 from the blueprint. Understanding capabilities and then pivot the offering. So brief history on abilities. They started with Heather Branscombe back in 2007 when they opened their first clinic. Heather is a physiotherapist in the public system and was moved to do more when their family met their 6-week-old son, who at the time was in foster care, who was brought into the Childhood Development Center where Heather worked. Abilities now has 4 locations and over 35 team members serving hundreds of families. So the problem statement we faced was back in early March, we knew we'd eventually have to close the doors and we didn't have a virtual offering. So we decided to go on full in, all in, and develop a virtual clinic for release in mid-March. We updated the website, built out a completely new line of business, educated and certified all staff who are comfortable performing virtual therapy, contacted all of our clients to walk them through what we were doing, why, and the benefits of virtual therapy. Here are the results. About a week after getting the new business up and running, we were forced to close the doors back on March 20th. In April, we retained 60% of pre-pandemic revenue with the doors closed and added 30 new families. In May, finished 65% of pre-pandemic revenue and added 20 new families. We just hired our first dedicated staff member specifically for virtual, and we'll be adding more along the way. And now, because of virtual, we can expand geography, and we're doubling down on marketing spend and ads. So just a real great example. Second quick one is ESA Fabrication. So it's a custom engineering and fabrication company located just down the corner here in downtown Phoenix. So ESA Fab was founded in 2005 as a direct response to the challenges within the electrical industry. So what began as a small electrical fabrication shop has now grown to one of the largest custom bending, threading, welding, metal fab, electrical product assembly, and material handling companies in the US. So for ESA, we utilize the relaunched blueprint step by step, starting with number 1, assessing the business and the environment. At the time, we didn't see any degradation in revenue or profitability, but we knew it was happening based on what's going on with construction. So we leveraged the blueprint in late March to think about what pivots we could make as a business. The owners, Brad and Tyson, came up with a new product idea that would support the construction industry and beyond. And it's called ReadySync. So it's a mobile hand wash station. The difference is it's got a streamlined design and it's got industrial quality of the build that nobody else offers. The closest thing when we launched was a plastic basin. You'd find outside on the porta potties on the way out of the Phoenix Open, and this thing's just different. We sell primarily through distributors, and ReadySync demand through those outlets, as well as private business, has been incredibly strong. So in summary, again, there's no doubt we're facing challenging times for almost every business. But what I would say is those that can get ahead and expand their thinking and be nimble are the ones that are going to survive this pandemic as well as whatever comes next. So thanks for the time to share at least a couple of thoughts and a couple of practical examples. And Eric, I'll throw it back to you.
All right, Patrick and David, thank you guys so much. We will bring you back here in just a few moments for some audience Q&A. But for the moment, I'm going to have you turn your cameras off because we are going to transition now into a fireside chat between GPEC President and CEO Chris Camacho and the CEO of Mayo Clinic here in Arizona, Dr. Richard Gray. Quickly about Chris Camacho, current President and CEO of GPEC. Under his leadership, they have attracted more than 322 companies, creating 55,000 plus jobs and generating a $5.6 billion capital investment. Dr. Gray, surgical oncologist and professor of surgery at the Arizona campus of the Mayo Clinic Cancer Center, the co-director of the Mayo Clinic Center for Breast Health in Arizona, and co-chair of the Breast Disease Group for all of Mayo Clinic. And he has published more than 110 peer-reviewed research manuscripts. Thank you both for joining us here this morning.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. My first question, first part of this fireside chat, we're going to go in three different sections here. We're going to cover reality, adjustment, and innovation. So let's start with reality. And Chris, question for you here. Just walk us through what you're seeing in the current state of things here in Arizona.
Yeah, well, thanks, Eric. So, and thanks, Dr. Gray, for joining us today. The current recessionary period, we've seen job losses in the United States that are now reaching 21 million. And it's hard not to reflect upon past recessionary times, whether it's the 91 S&L crisis, the 2001 kind of 9/11 recovery, post-recovery, the 2008 financial crisis, or the current healthcare crisis. But what's been sharply different about this one as opposed to some of the previous recessionary times was the immediacy and the significance of the job loss. So we're sitting here today roughly at 12.6% unemployment. The length of this recovery is unknown. The past recovery, just to put it in perspective, back in 2008, that was roughly 34 months for us to get back to full employment. And what's been really interesting is we built a decade worth of job growth, and that was really reduced, again, in about a 30-day period in the March cycle. And so, and I'm sure Dr. Gray will talk about this, but you probably read today that we had over 2,300 new cases of COVID announced just a few minutes ago. And so we're still in the midst of a serious pandemic. And I would encourage anyone that has a mask to wear it, number one, out in public. And as we look at what's going to drive this economic paradigm forward, some good news or some silver lining is that the retail sales numbers for May for the United States came back at 17.7% growth from April to May, which well above what the economists were projecting at roughly an 8% retail sales tax growth position. So not quite what we saw in April to May of 19, but still very, very favorable, almost 2.5 times what we expected. At the same time, the current landscape, if you watch the stock market, which I'm sure many of you do, it's been propped up significantly by the Fed. And is not only inclusive of the PPP and economic injury disaster loan program of putting massive amounts of capital in the hands of small business owners, but in addition to that, we're seeing now the Fed, which was announced in March, getting pretty deeply beyond the ETF funding and into some corporate bonds, and that's not something we've seen in some time. And so, with that said, you're going to see almost $1 trillion from the Fed placed into these bonds that are drawing some ire from various sides of the political aisle, because that is really propping up the stock market. So when you look at jobs, you look at unemployment, you look at retail sales tax, and then you have this other outstanding lever, which is the financial markets, they're still doing fairly well when, you know, a lot of our SMBs are still in recovery mode. And Eric, a large part of that is, and I'll finish with just this point, is the demand curve we're seeing is still roughly at best 50% for restaurants, 50% for retail, which is slowly coming back with durable goods sales. But we still have a bit of a row to hoe. And I don't want to be over optimistic from a standpoint of our pipeline, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, but because that does look very good. But we still haven't got to the point yet where we are controlling the outbreak of this virus. And so we want to do everything as Arizonans to, you know, practice not only good hygiene with washing hands, but also making sure we're social distancing, because that is one thing that could curb this enthusiasm or this momentum, is if we have a widespread outbreak that impacts our hospital systems. And, you know, it doesn't help nationally when we are at the front page of a lot of newspapers saying that, you know, we are the epicenter, we are the hot spot. And I know for how long we went through with Pride that, you know, we were keeping our heads down and able to execute 2 months ago. You know, now we're having clients not visit the market for the next 2 weeks because of being designated a hotspot. So with that, Eric, I'm still really confident in the long term, but I think we should be realists that best case, this is going to be a maybe a V shape, but probably more like an elongated U-shaped recovery. And we're going to keep putting our heads down to help the SMB market while we continue to work with our client base.
Yeah, Chris, thank you for that. And, you know, so many times, you know, talking about economic recovery, you talked about what's going on, you know, within this pandemic and the headlines that everybody's seeing. And let's bring Dr. Gray into the conversation now. Dr. Gray, you know, similar to what Chris was doing, we're kind of giving us what are the state of things as far as the economy goes. Can you address some of what Chris was talking about as far as the headlines and where we're at within the hospital systems and what you're seeing?
Yeah, so there's no question that we've seen an uptick in cases, and you know, COVID-19 has had serious effects, and I think we start on the individual level, individual lives, and you know, we've seen the number of deaths that have happened in Arizona and across the country, but there's a lot of people that get very sick from this, and so I always start with that impact. When someone's health is affected severely like that, it's a big deal, and it creates a lot of fear. Now, that is in the context that, you know, most people who get COVID-19 do fine with it, but certainly those that do get sick get a lot more sick. So what we were seeing is a bit of I think we did a good job in March and April and early May in Arizona at flattening the curve. We did not have an overwhelming wave. We were actually affected less than other areas. And I said from the beginning that was buying us time, but that we couldn't just say it's buying us time to sit and wait and hope it would just go away. It was buying us time to prepare and innovate. And I think a lot of people have done that. We just heard some innovations around the business side. Certainly Mayo Clinic and other hospitals have had to innovate in how to care safely for our patients and staff through all of this. But too many people, I think, have now approached this as, okay, we waited this out, now we go back to normal. And that's where we're running into problems.
Yeah, and what do you see, and again, it's hard not to go online or turn on the news, and again, where you're sitting as the CEO of Mayo Clinic here in Arizona, what do you see businesses doing well, and I guess where are they failing from a medical perspective? You know, Chris was talking about trying to get that demand back up. What are you seeing businesses doing well, and where are they failing?
Well, I think there's a mixed bag. And of course, the people that get the most attention are those that are not doing well, doing risky things. I think a lot of people are trying their best and doing very well in addition. It's not really that hard to know what to do. The CDC guidelines are very good. They're very clear. We just need to read them and actually do them. I really thought sort of coming into our reopening, the governor was wise in counseling business leaders to think about consumer confidence, to do things in your business that will give consumers confidence that they can be safe in your establishment. I think what we've unfortunately seen is that a lot of those consumers don't appear to have the level of concern that they should, and so they're willing to take advantage of whatever they can. So I do think, business leaders owe it to their staff and they owe it to their customers to make sure that both are staying safe. As much as we want to have business revived, we need to do so in new and different ways, adjust to the new normal. And be cautious about, even when we think we're doing well, being cautious of looking at those CDC guidelines. A quick example I would give is I see many restaurants and other businesses where the staff are wearing gloves. That intuitively seems to make sense, except the gloves pick up viruses as you go around, and you're much less likely to clean gloves. So unless you're changing gloves constantly, gloves are counterproductive, even though you think you're helping. It's better to use your hands and wash them often. So again, people need to look at those directives, follow them, and take them seriously, not just think that this has all gone away.
Chris, I'll bring you in now because Dr. Gray, said the word adjustment a couple times there. As we transition the theme of this fireside chat into adjustment, what adjustments have you seen leaders and companies make here in order to be stronger, be more resilient as we still battle the pandemic?
Well, I think Dr. Gray alluded to the business owners that are taking this seriously, that are utilizing CDC recommendations with PPE, with employee safety. Those are the business owners that are going to help us get back, safely and effectively in the economy. The challenge is it's not widespread. We're not seeing patrons operate with the level of safety that's needed, and hence why we're seeing our numbers rise. With GPEC and our peers, I think it's important that, while we're in a very challenging time, I go back to almost sitting in a similar seat back in 2008 and 9 when you looked at the economy, you saw the housing crisis, you saw the lack of liquidity, you saw the debt bubble that burst. And we're sitting here with, albeit a different issue, but yet I see the community coming together, whether it's the chambers or the Arizona Commerce Authority, the Black Chamber of Commerce, for example, the Hispanic Chamber. We're already talking about what's the next chapter in terms of adjustment to your question. The next chapter for economic development has to be, how are we supporting, again, going back to the PPP, that didn't solve the underbanked issue in our community, those that are micro businesses that don't have the traditional lending practices, need capital and liquidity to get through this process. They need demand curve, tying back to PPE and other safety practices. And heck, they need advisement. They need marketing, digital, all these resources. So we've even seen with GPEC's work the need to pivot our business model to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the community, which we're out on the front lines, as our business development team will tell you. We're doing pitches through Zoom like you wouldn't believe. By the same token, our strategy and research teams are working on how do we anchor with all these minority chambers to ensure that we're delivering value to these minority-owned businesses that, I'll be honest with you, it's make or break, it's sink or swim, and it's survivalist mentality. And so I can't stress that enough, that spend local, buy local, patronize those businesses, because otherwise they're not going to come out on the other side. And going back to just the numbers, Eric, for a moment, the 114,000 SMBs that have employees in our state, they're still roughly, our projections are about 11% of those are still at risk. So even as we've seen retail sales curve in a positive direction, that's roughly leaving 12,000, 14,000 businesses that could be under duress. And they're going to take with them tens of thousands of employees and indirect spend as well. So again, this is all woven into a broader economic strategy. And so adjustment wise, we've been on it with a lot of our peer organizations to help drive outcomes.
Yeah, and staying on adjustment, I'll transition the conversation over to Dr. Gray. Chris was just talking about how business leaders have had to adjust. What are you seeing from a healthcare leader standpoint? Has that been a difficult transition? Has it been smooth? Just interesting to hear your take on how healthcare leaders have adjusted.
Yeah, I think, in terms of healthcare leadership, we really had both sides. We had to deal with the health of the public, and we had to deal with the health of our organizations. And so early on, what I was heartened by is that all of us at Mayo Clinic, but really all the healthcare organizations across Arizona, at Mayo Clinic, our core value is the needs of the patient come first. And we really saw that in healthcare organizations across Arizona. We stopped doing elective operations, basically shut down the majority of our practice well before the governor even called for that in his executive order, because we knew our hospital was at high capacity, and we knew we didn't know how much was coming our way with COVID-19. So the first move I think I saw among healthcare leaders was to put communities first. We also very quickly saw cohesiveness in trying to go after this public health menace. Our chief medical officers at the Phoenix metropolitan area major health systems began having daily phone calls to coordinate, to make sure that the kinds of advanced critical care that some of the vulnerable communities needed was available and was equally distributed so that we could keep capacity going. Then as we came through this, we all had to do exactly what we're talking about businesses needing to do, which is and I'll use Mayo Clinic as an example, how do we restart being the Mayo Clinic that all of our patients need us to be in a COVID-19 world? Because we also saw the difficult effects of patients who delayed care that they needed because they were concerned about COVID-19. So what we have seen is at Mayo Clinic an incredible group of physicians and nurses and others that were dedicated to making that happen safely for patients, safely for our staff, and we've been able to do that. We've been able to care for our community, and I know healthcare organizations as a whole have had to do that. And now at the beginning of this, we asked for the public's health and flattening the curve. Now as we get more to activities, we're asking for the public's health again. Doesn't mean we have to shut down again, but we do have to do all of those things that we talked about to keep the healthcare systems from being overloaded, and quite frankly, to keep the staff and patrons safe at all of our Arizona businesses so that we can have the momentum move forward.
Yeah, and all of this messaging going out to the community. Chris, I'll bring you back into the conversation. We start each of these regional reports using the hashtag, asking people to use the hashtag greater PHX together. And even in our conversations, we've always talked about the advantages of living here and the community that we're building. So the question, what makes Greater Phoenix's economy strong, and how can we build on that during this current time? And again, as opposed to maybe if we were in Philadelphia or New York or another part of the country, what about Greater Phoenix makes us strong?
Yeah, so that likewise takes me back to the 2008, 9, 10 conversation where we were so reliant on construction and housing and really growth related enterprise and industry. And while healthcare was still a booming sector, largely driven by population growth, look at the maturity of the types of jobs now within our healthcare sector. It's not just patient care. You have tremendous leadership within Mayo Clinic, within a number of other institutions, Barrows, a lot of neuroscience capacity, CNS, cardiovascular. The evolution in healthcare has happened. And in addition to that, our bioscience job growth is very strong. Mission critical facilities, advanced business services, corporate services, tech, you name it, we're diversifying the economy. And that's probably the most stark realization from my perspective that's occurred in the last quarter, is that we were so reliant back in 2009 and 10 when we had 330,000 jobs lost, and 51% of those were in construction. So as that, was a wake-up call for all of us to say, look, we rode the gravy train in the early 2000s till 2007 with massive housing growth and all that boom in the massive liquidity placed within our market. But subsequent to that, we obviously felt the repercussions of being over-reliant on growth. So now when I talk to the housing developers that are out in the marketplace, they're actually seeing steady flows of activity. Now, in part, that's California. In part, it's our economy is, again, much more diverse. We're not as reliant on one sector to drive our economic position. And what I'm still even more excited about is turn the page, maybe 2 or 3 chapters as you did it as a kid. You just want to get to the end of the book, so you kind of read towards the end. I still think our next chapters for Phoenix as a region, this pivot in tech and tech-enabled activity through the investments like Taiwan Semiconductor, for example, massive implications for the United States, for Arizona, and for the region, because this is a global leader in transistors and chips, arguably unlike any other in the world. And so having them select us, our brand stock is probably as high as it's ever been. And talk about economic diversification, these catalyst deals, they play on each other. So when you have a company like that come to market, companies like Zoom come to market, all of a sudden I'm answering 30 other questions from other companies that want to consider this region. And economically, it just provides higher wage jobs, more insulation against a downturn when you have these kind of jobs in your community. And at the same time, you know, we still need to place intentional bets in certain technology areas. I mean, the fact that we're seeing emerging automotive occur in our region and in our state with the likes of Lucid Motors and Nikola and a couple others that Brad Schmidt and I toured recently, there is a lot of interest in areas that in 2010 we couldn't have dreamed of. So everyone should feel guarded optimism, but I will tell you, as we come out of this, and if we can come out of the pandemic, safely, I still think the best years are yet to come for our region.
And Dr. Gray, similar to what we were just talking about with Chris, Mayo has presence in markets all over the country. What have adjustments been like in the Phoenix area versus, say, Minnesota, other parts of the country that where Mayo is present?
Well, as Chris just referred to, Mayo Clinic sees a huge future in Phoenix and in the Southwest. So we are in the midst, actually, of the largest capital expansion project in Mayo Clinic's 154-year history right here in Phoenix. This is where Mayo Clinic decided to make that largest investment. And so we're doubling the size of our Phoenix campus. And, we were fortunate to come into this pandemic in a strong financial position and to be able to navigate it reasonably well, which has allowed us to continue those investments. A lot of our strategy at Mayo Clinic moving forward has just been accelerated by this crisis. We've been working over time. The obvious example is in telehealth. We've been working over time to increase our footprint in telehealth, to expand the reach of Mayo Clinic for complex and serious care to more individuals who can then travel to Phoenix for that care. In the midst of this pandemic, we began doing the number of telehealth visits per day that we were doing per year in 2019. So crisis always provides the opportunity for innovation and accelerating strategy if you can navigate it successfully. So Phoenix is a strong place for us. The Southwest is a strong part of Mayo Clinic's future for many of the reasons that Chris just referred to. And Mayo Clinic is looking to be a key part of that.
And perfect segue into the final part of our fireside chat, which will be on innovation. But I just want to pause here because we have a very engaged live audience. So if we do have any Q&As, again, you can use that feature at the bottom of your screen. And if we can get to them at the end of the webinar, we will try to do that. Okay, again, moving on to innovation, and as Dr. Gray just mentioned, innovation's been accelerated. So Chris, what specific examples have you been seeing where this has happened, again, on the business side of things, where this pandemic has, we've been innovating, but this has only accelerated those innovations?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, we, as a region, we were already down the path of IoT and telehealth specifically, but I would argue that COVID, much like Dr. Gray remarked, is accelerated a lot of these enterprises to invest and bet heavily on everything from telehealth, teledelivery. The gig economy is still something as a force to be reckoned with in a place like Arizona where you're spread out. You look at our rural, rural residents and the need for care. This just accelerated, I think, the new age of healthcare, particularly as we've seen reimbursements become enhanced for telemedicine. And so I think in healthcare, there's been a lot of innovations. And what, on one of our last telecasts, Eric, that you hosted with us is this competitive grant opportunity for these number of biomedical companies that have pivoted their business model to address COVID-related areas. What shocked me, not only that we had the quality, that didn't shock me, but the sheer number that we had to whittle down with the Pecos Foundation to get to top 4. I mean, there were 48 something applications of high quality technology. So again, what I'm careful about is, again, I get paid to be optimistic and a cheerleader, right? But I look at just the sheer amount of innovation that exists within our region in all these areas, whether it's densifying energy, densifying information for mission critical applications, to software as a service. We had a brief from Greg Head last week on Greg's List. If you're not aware of the growing number of software companies in the region, I mean, we're up to 600 plus now software companies. And when I tell the media that nationally, they almost call BS on me, because they're like, wait a minute, there's no way Phoenix is a place you go to retire. And I'm like, no, we're building the next generation software companies here in Arizona. So I can't even pinpoint a specific area because there's so much growth. But I kind of drive it back to IoT and the fact that, the Internet of Things, the digitization of every company. I think one kind of other learning or takeaway would be small businesses today that were so reliant on peer-to-peer sales or B2C sales. I've seen the ingenuity of those entrepreneurs or those small business owners to look at the digital environment. And that's going to be critical as we come out of this, because I do think that segment of the economy has to be transformed for survival. And so again, I am elated that we've got so much technology out there, but there's just a handful of examples that are come top of head to me today.
And Dr. Gray, you mentioned telehealth being one of those big innovation tools. Is there anything else, and maybe it is telehealth, that is might just be the new normal moving forward for years and years to come, that you were in the process of innovating, but what has happened has forced an acceleration, and this is the way it's going to be from now on?
Yeah. Well, I guess I would take that in a few different levels. I think one of the important things that has come in having a public health crisis and the unification that has brought to the healthcare community across Arizona is that we've been able to expand sort of a more base level of innovation more widely. So, for example, Mayo Clinic, we had a brilliant virologist in our lab who was able to develop the first COVID-19 test in the state and stand-up drive-through collections and so forth. Now, that's an innovation. It's a very targeted innovation, but because of those relationships and collaborations, we were able to then share that expertise widely, especially with vulnerable communities like our Native American population in Arizona that had such needs. We were able to both do testing for them, but also to teach others and to have others just look at that model and disseminate some of that much more quickly. Some of it has also been disseminating information. Chris talked about the gig economy. Much easier for us to disseminate these things. So as we made our safety protocols, our treatment protocols, and our research protocols around COVID-19, first, members of our Mayo Clinic Care Network in Arizona across the state and in rural areas, we were able to immediately digitally share that so they didn't have to work through that using their own resources. And then eventually we were able to get a version of that we could share through the Arizona Hospital and Healthcare Association. So again, having those kinds of abilities to spread information quickly benefits all of us at a base level. At a higher level, yes, I think telehealth is accelerated. But one of Mayo Clinic's strategies, speaking of the gig economy, moving forward has been creating platform businesses that will simplify healthcare for all Americans and Arizonans. And so we have a number of these underway that, again, have been accelerated based on COVID-19 needs. And I would give one example of a platform called Safe Health that was a group that Mayo Clinic now is in a joint venture with, that provides a platform where individuals can connect with a provider if they need to. They can work through a set of algorithms in terms of symptoms and other items. They can enter their temperature. It will connect them with a physician if they need to, and it will send testing right to their house where they can do a finger prick, put it on a cartridge, scan it with their mobile device, and get an instant COVID-19 result. Based on all of that, it then generates a QR code on their mobile device so that then they can go onto their workplace, onto their college campus, onto their school campus, wherever it may be, and they can just scan in as having gone through what is necessary for that to be a safe environment. So that's another example of things that were underway strategically that just come together and get accelerated in this kind of environment. So with a lot of bad also comes some good in terms of innovation.
Yeah, Dr. Gray, very, very encouraging. And I want to bring back David and Patrick now into the conversation. Again, I apologize for the viewers at home. I think you can see our screen went out. We'll try to get that fixed for you. Hopefully it's not too distracting. But David and Patrick, hopefully you guys have been able to listen in on the fireside chat there, and some audience Q&A coming in that I'll direct immediately to you because of what you're seeing in the healthcare space. How are medical facilities, and David, I'll just pose this to you, how are medical facilities upgrading their technology to adapt to COVID-19 as you see the need? And, you know, Dr. Gray just mentioned more telehealth, more virtual appointments.
Yeah, what we're seeing on the finance side is a lot of healthcare professionals on the medical office side and everything that spills out over that are really having to make adaptations with respect to technology. You're talking about panels that have to come in, conversations. We're seeing a lot of the telehealth that's manifesting as well. And not to mention that groups that are actually collaborating, we've talked a lot about collaboration, but we've just seen a lot of medical facilities collaborating with other groups to try to be successful and taking care of the end user. So the telehealth really is probably the most predominant that we've seen in the marketplace. And so it's just been exciting to see how they've made adjustments. We've also seen some groups in the cancer treatment that have opened facilities to try to adjust and deal with people that are going through chemotherapy right now as well. We're dealing with a company locally here that's expanding and adjusting to this so they can address the less than at this point. So that's been, I guess, encouraging to see as well.
Yeah, Patrick, anything from your perspective, specifically on how medical facilities are upgrading?
Well, first off, it's just great to be attending one of these and not talking about PPP or EIDL, which is usually what I'm talking about when I attend. So that's good news. The other part I would say is just acceleration. I think Dr. Gray mentioned it well, is there's a lot of good ideas and there are a lot of things in motion. And what we've seen, again, our focus is SMBs. And what we've seen in the last 3 months across the US and Canada is just those plans just had to accelerate. And if you didn't do it, you're either left behind or you just don't have the stomach for it, and that's fine too. Then the business opportunity just isn't there. So whether it's medical, whether it's biotech, whether it's construction, manufacturing, what we're seeing folks that are the other side with acceleration is folks that put the gas pedal down quickly and are being decisive with the decision making that needs to happen.
And Dr. Gray, I'm going to bring you back into the conversation because we heard it again, the medical community coming together, and just wanted your perspective on that. I know you touched on it a little bit, but what have you seen here locally from, you know, healthcare leaders from all different either hospital systems, private practice coming together as we all battle the pandemic?
Yeah, I think you know, the relationships and the connections that have been built through this will be something that will be sustained moving forward. If you have people dealing with a crisis together for a significant period of time, I used the example earlier of our chief medical officers for the Phoenix metropolitan area being on daily calls with each other, helping each other out, coordinating, working with the Arizona State Department of Health. Those kinds of efforts, those kinds of relationships will continue to propel us forward. So again, an example is one of our researchers here has a novel drug that targets a protein that COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, to be able to infect cells, and particularly lung cells, and has gotten clearance from the FDA to use that. Well, what happened? He doesn't open that just at Mayo Clinic. We've now coordinated with the leadership of many, I think it's now up to 9 Arizona hospital and health systems to be able to open that clinical trial that could be a cutting edge breakthrough for Arizonans, open it much more broadly. So that kind of collaboration, again, accelerates innovation because we're going to get a lot better answers and a lot faster answers by working together on many of these things.
Yeah, and that segues into this question that we have coming in. How are hospitals preparing for a possible second wave of COVID-19 and then a potentially bad upcoming flu season?
So we always have to prepare for flu season. This year is certainly different with having to prepare for COVID-19 and flu. Of course, right now in Arizona, I think our focus is on the here and now, but we didn't know very much in early March about how this would play out. We didn't know very much about what would be the necessary adjustments. We have learned so much about not just how to treat these patients, not just where the research needs to take us medically, but also in terms of the management of our hospital capacity and hospital census and the coordination across Arizona. So we, using Mayo Clinic as an example, we have gating criteria in place. We know what are the signals to say we need to make adjustment X, then adjustment Y, and adjustment Z, and what are the pieces of that we need to adjust. One of the big pressures, realistically, both right now and in the case of heavy needs for healthcare regarding flu and COVID-19 in the fall and the winter, is on critical care capacity. COVID-19 patients get very sick and stay sick for a long time. We have patients who are still in our ICU that started in there in April. And so being able to watch and adjust our critical care capacity is key, because these patients don't recover as quickly as those with, say, the flu or other respiratory illnesses that come into our critical care units. And therefore, there is the risk with ongoing pressure from COVID-19 or resurgent pressure of more and more patients coming in without patients recovering fast enough to balance that capacity, which means we will have to adjust other areas of what we do. And that can be very difficult for people. If they're waiting, they have a loved one who is donating part of their liver for a liver transplant or donating a kidney for a kidney transplant, but we need to adjust the timing of those around our capacity. That's very difficult for us to do for some of those patients, but we have those gating criteria in place, as do many other healthcare organizations, so that we can be cautious about making sure we can meet the needs of our community.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. And you mentioned you have those in place, criteria. I'm going to bring Chris Camacho back into the conversation. We've had this our 13th regional report, and we've talked to a lot of business owners. And in regards to this question, how are hospitals preparing for a possible second wave of COVID-19 and a possible bad flu season? How are businesses preparing? Because what I've been hearing from a lot of these interactions during the regional reports is, where hospitals may have, criteria, businesses don't have a benchmark for, what are we going to do if X happens, or when are we going to fully reopen? So what are those conversations been like between you and business owners preparing for a possible second wave?
Well, so there's very, very differing views of how, say, major banks, major office users are handling kind of the current situation. If you can stay remote, many of them are staying remote, but however, very different from the retail users that really depend on point of sale, and particularly those that don't have digital infrastructure to sell online. They're still struggling, and they, many respects are operating at 30 to 40% today. And so, when I talk to some of these folks, and I had a call with Local First Arizona this morning, talking about, they have 600 small businesses in Arizona that unfortunately they don't have the grant dollars to provide to, and they're also, Patrick talked about PPP. I'm tired as well of talking about PPP, so we won't today. But those that either weren't eligible or the math didn't make sense because they were restaurants and didn't carry the payroll that would have made sense for the PPP process. All these underbanked and smaller companies, Eric, are still in survival mode. And again, so I go back to, I don't know any other way to prop up, save, support those kind of enterprises, but for spending money at their establishments. And this is almost like the old grassroots ground game marketing. It's friends, family, and so forth. And I've heard a number of examples, even on these telecasts, where that's happening. But I think it goes back to kind of, I see this community very different from where I'm from in the Midwest, where, the community really relies on each other and certainly is here to break down barriers to help one another. And I think that's what we have to lean on. You talked about Greater Phoenix Together. Hopefully it's Greater Phoenix Together wearing masks together, because that is something we must do. I'm just going to put a plug in there, Dr. Gray. But I mean, that's something I'm seeing, businesses leaning on each other, with each other, to get through this together. And a lot of these organizations that we historically hadn't interfaced with that regularly, we are now, to really try to lend a hand to get our corporate partners aligned with their loan infrastructure or grant infrastructure. So that's what you're seeing currently out in the marketplace.
And Eric, if I could just play off one thing there in terms of supporting each other, because I think it comes off of what Chris said about masking. Masking in our current environment is a perfect example. Masking is not about protecting yourself. It's about making an investment in protecting the people around you. I wear a mask to protect others. You wear a mask to protect me. And that's the spirit that Chris is talking about in our community. And I would add one other piece to that, since you brought up a possible second wave in a flu season, is getting flu immunization, getting your flu shot this fall. That we're going to see pressure again on our hospital systems if it's not just continuing at that time. And the addition of a bad flu season is really tough. And again, getting the flu shot, even if you are dubious about the flu shot and don't think you need it to protect you, protect your community, make the investment in others, just like we're asking people to do with being cautious about COVID-19. We need to have that same attitude towards the flu shot when that time comes this fall.
Yeah, and Dr. Gray, great timing, because these questions come in cold a lot. And the question that just came in was, for you, what do you think of major institutions like ASU and others taking mask enforcement into their own hands at this point?
Yeah, I think, again, I'll speak for Mayo Clinic. We require that our employees wear masks when they're on our campus. And we require visitors and actually patients, unless they have a health condition that precludes it, to wear masks while on our premises. We have to do that. We have way too many vulnerable people in our institution. But we do it because, again, our core value that I mentioned before, the needs of the patients come first. We need to protect those patients. But our staff is incredibly important also, and we're going to protect our staff. And we know that COVID is out there, and so the visitors that come onto our campus, we're not going to allow exposure to our staff from them, nor from our staff to each other. So we're taking a very proactive approach to that. I think each individual business really needs to think about what they want to invest in protecting their own people and protecting their patrons as well.
And Dr. Gray just mentioned, and Chris, we're talking about masks, and I'm going to bring David and Patrick back into the conversation now. How about, aside from masks, is COVID-19 affecting the design and planning of healthcare spaces? Are you seeing that start to take shape?
Yeah, we're seeing a tremendous amount of that. We were on the phone with a bunch of executives from around the states and locally. And one of the things that we heard, which kind of pivots off of what Rick and Chris were talking about, was you take care of your house and then you go out and start thinking about other people. And so one manufacturer in particular, they're fairly large, actually had to go out of their way because it was about a 50-50 of some of the employees wanted to come back, some didn't. And in order to receive some of the docking that comes in, they actually had to start building a facility to be able to protect some of the employees, just to give them a sense of security and a sense of safety. So it was a great example for them to, again, go gather wisdom, come back and delineate, and then make a decision to try to see and find a way to, assist their employees. And we're seeing that pretty consistent across the board, that a lot of these leaders are going out of their way to try to think through how could they benefit, even going to the coffee station. What does that look like, and how are we going to see some new innovation from architects to layout, and even on the banking side? So we're very encouraged to see that people are really pressing out and having an attitude of thinking together.
I was just going to share.
Go ahead, Patrick.
I was just going to share one thought that Dr. Gray mentioned the flu. And I was just thinking back, we send off these emails and updates, and the Spanish flu, right? 1918, I think 500 million folks affected across the globe. And then what followed that? We had depression, we had recession, and we had roaring 20s. So think of everything. I have a type 1 diabetic son. Insulin was invented. The Band-Aid was invented. Television was invented. Car manufacturing, right? All this came out of the roaring 20s. And just like Chris said, I'm paid to be an optimistic as well, and but also paid to be a realistic person. And I'm full of optimism. Obviously, there's a health scare that we have to be cognizant of. But I think our folks and our clients, and Dave, we talk about this quite a bit. But there's incredible optimism that American spirit can't be outdone.
Yeah, and we're going to thank you for that. We're going to give each panelist just a few moments here for some final remarks before we close. So, David, anything as we close out here?
Yeah, I just think, the consistent message that I think we're hearing is, we need to think outside of ourselves and take precautions that will impact the greater good. And then we also need to think outside of our box to be able to say, how do we move forward and look forward with a sense of optimism and realism at the same time. So I'm just encouraged about that, and hopefully this can be of value to those that are listening today. So thanks for the time.
Yeah, and Dr. Gray, a great discussion today. Any final thoughts here before we close?
Yeah, I would just reiterate that as our economy has opened up and people are getting more back to work and more to normal activities, that doesn't mean that our atmosphere is normal. And that doesn't mean that our behaviors go back to normal. We have an update on what's happening at Mayo Clinic now that we call the new normal. And that's what I'd like people to take away is right now we're in a new normal. And the new normal is not just the innovations we're talking about, but the new normal is how we stay safe and how we invest in each other, as David just said. And we need to continue to invest in that, continue to keep that top of mind. All of us just want this to be over and act like we did back in January and February, but it's not there yet. And while it's not there, the best way we can stay as close to normal, the best way we can fulfill those optimistic thoughts that we've all just expressed is to be in the new normal mindset and to do the things we need to do, but to do them differently so that we're safe and we're investing in each other.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. And Chris, optimism seems to be a common theme here. I'll give you some time now for some final remarks.
Yeah, I think of my closing remarks around kind of sports team analogy. So I look at Phoenix as a region as, a team that was always in the playoffs, maybe never won the series, but you look nationally at markets, whether it's, I was talking with a guy from Philly yesterday, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Boston, all of these places have momentum, different levels of momentum, and you're either moving forward or you're stepping back. And what I think is going to come out of this beyond making our market more dynamic and strengthening our resolve, I do believe that Greater Phoenix as a market is going to be held in such high regard, assuming we can manage this kind of latest wave effectively. We already have a really hot hand as it relates to venture capital equity placement that we didn't have 10 years ago. Again, we're a young, maturing place. And I'm a realist, as Patrick talked about, a realist about the numbers. But I can't help think about the next 2 or 3 cycles ahead as we move away from real estate, and real estate becomes a supplemental aspect of our economy, whereas healthcare, corporate services and headquarters, advanced manufacturing, emerging technology, as all of these become the mainstays, much like you think of Detroit in the 60s and 70s, or you think of St. Louis at the turn of the century in the early 1900s, I mean, we're like the new gateway market, and we just need to make sure we're harnessing that, we're making the right public policy and tax moves, so we don't end up in a place that goes in reverse, because there are going to be places coming out of this unequivocally going in the other direction. And we're already starting to see some of that where companies are placing headcount and capital. So I'm very bullish on our future, and we're going to be telling the world our story as we come out of this. And I'm just very optimistic about where we're headed.
Yeah, you know me, I love the playoff team analogy. Panelists, before we close here, I'm going to have you hang on before we take a photo. I just want to mention to our audience that, again, the GPEC Ambassador Program will be launching that event this Thursday on Arizona's Water Blueprint in partnership with ASU. That's 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Again, exclusive event for GPEC investors. So if you're not a GPEC investor, send Nicole an email there. She's on the engagement team. That email's at the bottom of your screen.